Welcome to the first session of our Cyber Masterclass series presented by MCPc and McDonald Hopkins.
The Cyber Masterclass is a 5-part in-depth webinar event that examines the cybersecurity landscape from multiple points of view and culminates with the anatomy of a data breach.
Featured panelists in the field of cybersecurity law, technology, risk management, and communications from MCPc, McDonald Hopkins, Dixon Eaton, and Oswald companies will share their expertise along with professionals from the FBI, CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, an independent arm of the Department of Homeland Security, and other distinguished guests. The series will take a holistic approach in examining the clear and present danger of cyber threats,
legal and cyber risk imperatives,
how your technology partner drives data protection,
and incident response planning,
all leading up to a fascinating finale, the anatomy of a data breach, which will include a live interactive simulation showing how all of these topics come together.
Because all of these sessions are interactive, we encourage you to share your questions by emailing us at events@mcdonaldhopkins.com and look for links to breakout sessions where you will be able to speak directly with presenters about topics specific to your organization or industry.
Session 1. The clear and present danger of cyber threats begins now.
Well, good afternoon, everybody on the East Coast, and good morning for everybody on the West Coast. On behalf of MCPc and McDonald Hopkins, I want to thank you for joining us today for the first in our 5-part Cyber Masterclass series. My name is Gunput Wog, and I'm a security principal here at MCPc and based in our Cleveland office. I joined MCPc earlier this year after a 20-year career in the FBI, where I focused on computer intrusion investigations and cyber policy in a variety of offices, including Kansas City, Baltimore, Cleveland, and then tours at FBI headquarters in Cyber Division, Counterterrorism Division, the Deputy Director's Office, and the Director's Office. And we're very lucky today to have a number of distinguished panelists, including Chris Gabbard, a cybersecurity advisor for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and Eric Smith, special agent in charge for the FBI Cleveland Field Office. Also joining us today during the Q&A session will be Dominic Paluzzi, a member of the McDonald Hopkins National Data Privacy and Cybersecurity Practice Group. He co-chairs that group, and he advises organizations on data privacy and cybersecurity risk and has counseled clients through over 3,000 data breaches and privacy incidents, and works closely with local, state, and federal law enforcement, forensic investigators, and third-party cybersecurity vendors. All of us on the panel will be happy to address questions from the audience at the conclusion of our presentation today. You can submit your questions at any time during the webinar by emailing events@mcdonaldhopkins.com or by using the questions feature located in the GoToWebinar control panel. If you submitted questions in advance of the program today, we will try to cover those during our discussion. We have a lot to cover, so let's get started. Our first speaker to brief us on current threats is Eric B. Smith. Eric is the special agent in charge of the FBI Cleveland office, a position he started in December of 2018 after being named by Director Christopher Wray. Eric graduated from the FBI Academy in 1999 and was first assigned to the Wichita Resident Agency for the Kansas City Field Office. His next tour of duty was a management position in Counterterrorism Division at FBI headquarters, where he served as a supervisory special agent and unit chief in the International Terrorism Operations Section, focusing on countering threats both domestically and internationally. In 2008, Eric was selected as the field supervisor for the Cleveland Division JTTF, Joint Terrorism Task Force. During this time, he also deployed to Bagram and Afghanistan and served as the FBI senior rep to the nation's elite counterterrorism joint task force. In 2013, Eric was promoted to assistant special agent in charge of FBI Cleveland, where he had oversight for the counterterrorism and cyber matters. In April of 2015, he joined the senior executive service as the chief of staff to the FBI deputy director. In December 2016, he transitioned to the director's office and was executive special assistant to both FBI directors Comey and Wray. Previous to the FBI, Eric was a military intelligence officer in the United States Army and did rapid deployment forces with rapid deployment forces at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Military awards include the U.S. Army Ranger Tab and the Senior Parachutist Badge. And so with that, I will turn it over to Eric Smith to lead our first presentation of the morning. Eric, over to you.
Thanks, Gunnar. I very much appreciate the introduction and apologize for the bio. My mother wrote it, so it's a little lengthy, and I'll see to it that I get that truncated in the near term. But in all honesty, it is great to be with all of you today, and very appreciative of MCPc and McDonald Hopkins for putting this together. And I think I'm going to start out by saying that we can't over-engage on the topic, and organizations, I think, must be willing to sort of develop an iterative approach to the threats that we face, and attempt to the greatest extent possible to sort of adopt a defense in depth. And I use that based on sort of my Army history, where much like an Army would set up a deliberate defense, where we would put out listening posts or OPs out far out in advance of the perimeter. We have scouts and ISR roaming overhead. We've got engineer obstacles. We have concertina wire, claymores, and then we've got, of course, our fighting positions. And I think that's what we need to think about in terms of how we adapt our cyber strategies and keeping ourselves safe. And I will just lay out a few objectives for us moving forward. And I think the first thing that all of us in this class, and probably all of us already know, is that this is not just an IT problem. This is an organizational problem. It's an organizational challenge. And for those of us who ask, the CSOs and our CISOs have been talking about the importance of this issue for years. And I think if they've been the ones knocking on the door of the C-suite saying, hey, we've got to get our act together or else we're going to fall further and further behind. And the reason why it's important is because the criminals and the adversaries that we face are putting in the work, and they think it's important. So if we aren't prepared, then we become victims. We'll talk a little bit about how they do it. We're going to discuss some of the common schemes. We'll look at the threat actors, like who is doing this to us, and then we'll talk a little bit more in depth about the specific cyber schemes and what we've learned and how to adapt our strategies to sort of counter the threat. And then finally, how to act and respond, and a key portion of that protection and response is our private sector and law enforcement engagement, and how we're focusing on what we've learned and what we can do to better serve the private sector based on what we've seen across our work in the space. So I think that's kind of our core objectives here with my portion of the presentation. So with any good FBI presentation, I would be remiss if I didn't provide at least some of the background of the FBI for those folks who aren't familiar with the FBI and what we do. I know a lot of it have watched, a lot of us, certainly I as a child, watched a lot of FBI stuff on television. That probably led to me wanting to become an FBI agent. It certainly didn't hurt. So just some propaganda for you all to think about as we move forward in the presentation. But the Bureau has been around for a long time. It was established in 1908 by Charles Bonaparte, who, oddly enough, called the FBI an innovation. He called it as such because they needed a new way to fight crime, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. It is part of the executive branch of government. It's within the Department of Justice, and we're one of 5 law enforcement components in DOJ. And the others are we're one of 5: United States Marshal Service, the DEA, the ATF, the Bureau of Prisons, and of course the FBI. So every FBI director, and Director Christopher Wray is our current FBI director, and they serve a 10-year term. There are reasons for that, and the 10-year term is to make sure it overlaps administrations and to make sure it's free from political influence. And we have a national and international presence, and in that provides the great strength for our organization. So we have 56 field offices that cover many of the large metropolitan areas across the United States. And in those 56 field offices, we have over 400 resident agencies, which means they're smaller satellite offices, that serve within the larger field office. So I'm from Cleveland, so we have 8 additional offices or subordinate offices that exist throughout Northern Ohio that fall under the major or the headquarters city, or Cleveland. So that's kind of how we're positioned domestically. Across the world, we have 64 offices and foreign embassies as part of the country team. So we sit side by side with the ambassador, country team representatives from many of our federal partner agencies. And so that gives us an ability to work not only within local towns with local police officers hearing about local issues and local attacks to infrastructure, local attacks to businesses, all the way to the larger metro areas, which we've talked about, and then to our foreign partners and what they're seeing over there. And we've also adapted, as Gunnar knows, in a number of different offices and embassies across the country, a cyber position within those embassies that specifically serve those embassies and our foreign partners as part of provide that cyber expertise to our foreign partners as part of the cooperation that we have with other law enforcement intelligence agencies across the world. So a great addition to our overseas presence. Speaking of overseas presence and our workforce writ large, we have about 37,000, give or take, employees. And within that bunch, we have about 13,500 agents. And so what many people think about in terms of the FBI is that, this is an organization, with just a bunch of gun toters running around the country, fighting crime. While some of that is true, I would say that that's only about a third of our workforce. So of 37,000 employees, we've got about 13,500 gun carrying 1811s that act as special agents. And the bulk of our workforce is comprised of intelligence analysts, staff operational specialists, forensic accountants, forensic scientists, computer scientists, folks that really help us do the targeting, that help us do some of the nug work that makes what we do effective. So that's kind of where we are as an organization, and happy to take questions about that, and very proud of the organization. And so if you have any questions specific about the FBI, I would be happy to take those at any time. Our FBI priorities, this is something that we look strongly at, and I know there might be some questions about how we sort of rack and stack our priorities across the organization and how we do that locally. But overall, we have priorities that are sort of sort of things that we have to focus on. One of those, obviously, the first priority for us is protect the United States from terrorist attack in all forms. The second priority being protect the United States from foreign intelligence operations and espionage. Third, protect the United States from cyber-based attacks and high technology crimes, and those are becoming blurred. So I would say 2 and 3, as we'll talk about further on in the presentation, cyber has become the vector, as all of us know, and we are refining the way that we do business in terms of looking both at espionage, foreign intelligence, and cyber. Fourth in that category or that list is combating public corruption at all levels, because it's one of the things that is uniquely suited to the FBI. Protecting civil rights, obviously, our 5th priority, and then combating transnational criminal organizations and enterprise. 6, 7 would be combating major white-collar crime, and 8 is combating significant violent crime. So those are kind of our top 8 priorities. And I'm happy to talk about our priorities and how we address those. And that's the national level priorities. And then we, of course, internally to every field office, review those priorities every year. And there are threats that are subordinate threats to those priorities that we then rack and stack to make sure that we are ideally positioned to not only mitigate the threat, but proactively address any concerns that we see as part of our local threat landscape. So pivoting from kind of our national priorities to why cyber is important. I'm not telling any of you here in this webinar what you don't already know. All of our lives are now online, whether it's from banking, some of our leisurely activities and gaming, social life, obviously, and then to some extent our nation's secrets. We have a lot of our own information, what we would think to be a company's proprietary information. Our proprietary information, the crown jewels for our organization, exist in an online platform in some degree. So we have to be very careful, not only helping you with your cybersecurity, but also keeping our own crown jewels safe. And of course, if that's the case, if all of us are living our lives online, then that's where the bad actors go. So as we go, so to the bad actors. And I think as a result of that, the world has shrunk exponentially, and criminals are now closer and can move sort of faster and more agile than they ever have before. As I said before, when Charles Bonaparte, the Attorney General in 1908 created us, and what he called us as an innovation, we were born from what we would consider at the time to be great technological change. And, that change, of course, was the advent of the automobile and the increasing threat from criminals to sort of interrupt interstate commerce. And in much the same way, cyber now is that new vector change for the organization. So when we first took swings at this new threat, I think we would handle it like you would expect. We created a cyber division that was full of smart people that had some IT background, and we tried to work it from a silo. And I think very quickly we recognized that while we had some very smart people trying to address those threats from that position, it maybe wasn't the best way of doing business. So we realized we had to take a cross-programmatic look at it, and that's a fancy way for us of saying that we had to combine the skill sets of both those folks who understood the elements of a crime, those people who understood, what a pump and dump scheme was, those folks who understood what folks were doing in the violent crimes against children space, or what those experts knew about transnational organized crime. And we had to combine that with the people that knew the technology very well and knew how adversaries were using technology to get at and to conduct those crimes. So we began to sort of merge those experts together. And so not only does that require sort of us to look at the threat, this asymmetric threat, more holistically, as Gunnar talked about in his intro, but it also requires sort of multiple skill sets to address it within our organization. And then that also then in turn led for us to understand that we needed to be better at training our people and deploying our resources. A lot of times we talk about a rising tide lifts all boats, and I think that's true in this space. So I think I've already said kind of why we should care, and I would just go to why you should care. If there are any non-believers out there, I would say that just the stats alone tell us that we have to be on our game. When you think about sort of victimization and maybe the lack of situational awareness of victims writ large across the country, it's the data has shown for us that it was an external entity that notified a victim of an intrusion set 63% of the time. So that's a pretty startling statistic when you think about individuals that didn't even know that there was somebody resident on their network before detection. And I think the stats that we have here were that that there was an adversary residing on the network for upwards of 230 days, or approximately 7 months before they even recognized that there was a problem. And whether that was an internal detection or whether that was us or somebody else coming in to say, hey, you've got a problem. In terms of economic espionage, many of those victims were unaware of the crimes until years after the loss of information. So one of the longest victimizations that we saw was that there was somebody that didn't know that they had been victimized until 6.5 years after the crime occurred. So, and then the last thing I would add to that is that even though they became aware of themselves being victimized or the corporation being victimized, 40% of the victims were attacked again after initial remediation. So if that's not enough to say why we should care, I don't know what is. And I think, our CISOs and our security folks have been right all along, and they've been sort of beating down the door and leading the way for this. So now, as we say, this is not an IT problem, this is an organizational problem. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So I know you've heard those things before, but it bears repeating. And as I said before in my opening statement, that we cannot over-engage on the issue. I know at the end of this thing, Gunnar's got you all excited for this anatomy of a hack, and but I would be remiss. Obviously, we'll just kind of then I'll tease it a little bit by saying for us, it's something that we look at because it's something we've learned over time and how these adversaries are getting into the network. Obviously, probing the wire through reconnaissance. The initial compromise through whether it's a email account compromise or a bank email compromise or business email compromise. So that's kind of that's how they gain and establish a foothold, and then sort of they escalate their privilege and sort of move laterally across the network, marking files for exfiltration, and then of course exfilling the data to something like a Google Drive or a Dropbox, and then And then, of course, the jewel for them is to be able to maintain a presence on the network. And so I know they're going to talk about that, so I won't go into that in detail, but I think it's worth at least laying out for you at the outset. And for us, we like to look at everything in terms of threats, and so that's the way we are as an organization. So I think the slide that you have up there now kind of gives you sort of a broad spectrum of what we look at and how we sort of break down the groups that we try to counter. So the first thing we can talk about a little bit is hacktivism and what is it. And I do think this slide's helpful because it sort of gives us the entire spectrum and it breaks down each by motivation and purpose. And at the bottom of this, you can see for us where FBI authorities exist and where we kind of are solely and uniquely suited to address the cyber threats that exist out there. You can see on hacktivism, crime, and insider threat, there's exclusive Title 18 authority, meaning that we're really the only agency that can address that from a Title 18 perspective. And so I think that's helpful to know, or at least Title 18 authority and those three. And then on the other three, the espionage, terrorism, and warfare, there's some additional authorities, Title 50, and of course Title 10 with the military that really works in the sort of the nation state actor sabotage realm. So all of that being said, we'll kind of break it down a little bit one by one. We can leave the slide up and we'll kind of talk about them specifically. So for hacktivism, you know, the definition I think that we've used, and I'm not sure it's in the Webster dictionary, but what we define it as is computer network exploitation or attack to advance a political or social cause, such as environmental terrorism groups would be one. Hacking for activism equals hacktivism. And we break it down even further into sort of three individual groups. And the first tier we look at under the legal threat would be an activist, somebody who, you know, boycotts a product or writes a public official or has online discussions or conducts peaceful public assembly. That's on the legal side, and we consider that to be activism. Where we get into the criminal realm is sort of the next level up, where we talk about doxing and website defacement, DDoS, data breaches, data destruction, and public data release. That exists in the criminal realm, and that allows us to get involved. And then if you want to escalate it even further, where you get into the extremist realm, and that's where you get into physical attack and infrastructure attack. And I know we'll talk a little bit about that later. And I'm sure CISA will have some discussions about infrastructure protection. So that's kind of the three tiers we see on the hacktivism, sort of a non-financially driven action. But that's how we define and how we look at hacktivism writ large. The next one we would talk about, I think, is the criminal threat. And we talked a little bit before about email account compromise, business email compromise. And that typically involves, as we know, hacked or spoofed emails from a CEO to somebody in the accounts payable section or the CFO even possibly, where it looks like hundreds of other previous emails that they've received over time, where they're requesting somebody within that shop to initiate a wire transfer, which typically is overseas. And while the amount of the transfer may look a little odd, many companies continue to do that. And the victims are large corporations with great infrastructure. They're small businesses, they're title companies, they're attorneys, entities which typically engage in wire transfers. And in 2019 alone, the exposed dollar loss exceeded 1.7 billion. And if you think about that, in terms of how that has increased exponentially, up until 2016, the losses were approximately 5 billion. So we got to 1.7 billion alone in 1 year, just in 2019 alone. So it is becoming, it is a target-rich environment out there, and we're looking anywhere between 22,000 and 24,000 victims annually. So this is a target-rich environment. It is increasing, and it's not showing any signs of stopping. Obviously, some of the recommendations and something that your corporations have probably already done is dual authentication, report to law enforcement immediately, where we are able to get some of the money back. But typically, through IC3 and others, we're able to at least address some of those threats. But the best thing to do is not is not to fall victim to it. Payroll spoofing is another aspect of that, where hacked or spoofed emails requesting W-2 or other payroll documents to be sent, and that has been the bane of the IRS's existence. And I think they had over $4 million fraudulent returns in 2019 alone. So obviously, this is something that's been very profitable for our adversaries, and I think it's something that we need to continue to focus on through outreach within our own companies. And I will tell you that we strive very hard to be very InfoSec conscious. As Gunnar knows, every year we take a course that is much maligned within our organization, but it's something that is something that we should be doing. And I'll tell you, they sent out a test email to our organization this year, and an uncomfortably large number of individuals clicked on a link they shouldn't have. And so, we ourselves need to get better at ensuring and keeping our own data safe. So, so just a word to the wise. The third thing that we talk a little bit about, well, at least within that, the criminal threat is the computer intrusion, also within the criminal spectrum, and ransomware. And right now, I think we're counting at over 200 variants and types of ransomware. So it's kind of like an opinion; everybody has one. And we've seen a large increase in ransomware over the past few years. I think there was a 500% increase in ransomware in 2018, 2019. So it just continues to get worse and worse, where the user receives a pop-up message, after they click on an email or attachment within a URL, they receive a pop-up message then demanding payment. And all of us have seen that in our training. So this will usually encrypt the files on the network and share drives accessible by the victim. It's easy to prevent, but unfortunately, testing shows that a large percentage of our employees have done it here, and it's likely that that's happening in your own organizations. And of course, it's hard to recover unless you have good backup data. So, obviously, continuing concern from the criminal aspect. Cyber and financial crime. On the financial fraud issue, we talked about business email compromise, email account compromise, and identity theft, and sort of subordinate threats to identity theft is both tax fraud and then home equity loan lines of credit. Everybody is looking at refinancing these days, and so we see that as a significant concern moving forward, where thieves are typically looking at mortgage fraud as a great vector to get into and to exploit identity theft. So obviously, no shortage of issues there. Insider threat, obviously something that we took very seriously. We created an insider threat section within our organization, and for all of us who have crown jewels that we are trying to protect, we know that individuals who have authorized access to an organization can act in a way that negatively impacts not only our organization but the brand and the bottom line. So there may be no greater threat to a company than someone who feels that they were either personally aggrieved, but that they also know where the crown jewels of the organization and where the sensitive data resides. That is a significant threat to an organization. And that can happen through embezzlement, it can happen through corporate espionage, theft of intellectual property of coworkers, sabotage in some instances, and even workplace violence. We all know what the indicators are. We've been trained to look for them. So I won't belabor the point here, but obviously someone who voices disagreement with company policies or coworkers, odd working hours, financial stress, potentially followed by unexplained financial gain, overseas travel, and then separation from the company. So we just ask that within your organization, you take these indicators seriously, that you engage with law enforcement if you believe that there's an issue, and you can't really, as we said before, you can't over-engage on this issue, and we certainly would appreciate if you feel like you've got something that's happening in your company that revolves around an insider threat. We would love to support your efforts in that regard. The fourth thing, and I think we want to spend a little time here, is on espionage. And right now we are in the midst of an ongoing war. I think that's probably not too strong to say that we are probably seeing and witnessing the largest transfer of wealth, the illegal transfer of wealth in the history of the world, and that is from us to China. And I think about, if you think about China, not necessarily as a country, but as a company bent on conducting economic espionage against the United States. I think that's sort of the best description, because right now they are taking between 300 and 600 billion dollars in intellectual property from the United States every single year, and that is existential, and it's not sustainable. And for us, we are taking a hard line, not only within our organization, but I think across the whole of government. And I think it's the first time since the ping pong table diplomacy of the 70s under President Nixon, where we have a whole of government approach aligned to address that threat. And it's important because they are, if you think about us, where we have wholly independent law enforcement and intelligence agencies that are designed to protect corporations in China and in other countries, they have these, their corporations are not distinct or separate from the Communist Party. And when we talk about the Chinese, we're not talking about the Chinese people, we are talking about the Chinese Communist Party. So I want to make sure we have a distinction there. So I think that for us, focusing on the threat from China is we just can't overemphasize the impact that that's having on how we do business. And many of the corporations out there recognize, and some of you maybe recognize this quote, but I've been told that many corporations are looking at it in terms of a 3-year model, that they know that by conducting business overseas with China, that they can work a product line for 3 years before the Chinese have taken over that product line, have either duplicated it and then caused the company to go out of business. So they look at it in terms of 3 years of potential economic growth, and that's about it. So very important, very concerning. So if we could move, we'll talk a little bit just briefly about, we'll talk about terrorism. We look at terrorism in terms of a few things. The targets that they're looking for, obviously communications networks, the financial industry, power grids, industrial control systems, and then blended attack and simultaneous cyber and physical attacks. So I think when we think about terrorism in the spectrum of U.S. cyber threats, we're looking at it as ways to destroy and not collect. So that's the way we've looked at it, and that's the way I think they're looking at it. Obviously, there are some additional, there's Stuxnet variants out there, Dooku, Flame, and Gauss, and there's some data destruction and threats of violence, but largely what they're looking for is they either use cyber as a means to use encrypted communications and social networking and extremist forums, but largely what they're trying to do is to cause destruction within the cyber realm. So what are they after? I think that's fairly obvious. If you look at the spectrum here between government, healthcare, and the financial sectors, they're trying to take anything from intellectual property to the technology that we have there, and to specific business processes that allow them to refine their processes to become more profitable in their own countries. And I think that if you see the stat on the bottom left below, they're not afraid to use the dark net and the black market to look at virtual currencies as a way to manipulate and obtain some of that data. So right now, I think we're tracking $600 million traded on the black market alone in terms of Bitcoin and other virtual currencies. So they are using the dark web as a way to take the intellectual property they've taken and then sell it on the highest bidder, and using Bitcoin as a means to enrich themselves. So I want to do one more. I want to put one more thing up there about state sponsors. We talked about it briefly on the espionage side, but the state sponsors of cyber war, where we have some of the Title 10 and Title 50 authorities with our DoD partners. You look at Iran in 2010 with Stuxnet and Dooku. I talked about that briefly, and the reasons they have for initiating those attacks is for their nuclear ambitions, and of course their impact there is uranium enrichment. And Saudi Aramco and the attacks against them in 2012, The Shamoon virus, the corrupted master boot record, and the reasons there was the destruction and negative financial impact, which also had them offline for 9 days. In Ukraine in 2014, we had the DDoS attack. And the reason there was to facilitate the Russian annexation of Crimea. And the impact there was the government officials lost communications. Obviously, a significant attack on the Ukraine, and one that had significant geopolitical ramifications. And then for us here domestically, where state sponsors really conducted a significant attack on us was with Sony Pictures and Sony in 2014. And the attacks there for various reasons, but destruction, negative financial products, or negative financial impact, leak sensitive data, information, physical threats. So for us, one of the things that we ask in working with our private sector partners is the benefit of working with us before an incident. Obviously, for us, it allows increased optics into what we consider to be nefarious cyber activity. And we do have a compendium of lessons learned and best practices. We know the types of specific signs of an intrusion set, and we can help identify and come up with mitigation strategies long before the ongoing impact can continue to siphon off information from your network. So it's important that you talk to us first and early and often. And I hope you all have cyber contacts within your own areas that you can reach out to before an event occurs. Obviously, the opportunity to discuss response posture and reducing costs responding to a cyber attack. Often we see companies save pennies to lose dollars, and we would ask you to avoid that and get in front of it before that occurs. And then I think for us, trust is the key. So it's better to sort of patch the roof while the sun is shining, as they say, than when the storm is occurring. So we just want to make sure that we have that relationship with you before something occurs. On a personal level, we want all of us, as we talked about before, we've clicked on links that we shouldn't have. And so we just want to refine our practices. We want to help you refine your practices. So we are conducting good security for organizations across the United States. Enterprise-wide, we want to develop sort of a culture of information security between us and you. And then sort of engagement and collaboration between IT and business lines. And that's kind of what we saw early on. It's what I talked about in terms of our maturation of how we conduct the cyber, our sort of evolution to address the cyber threat. And that is not working this in a silo where we had an individual cyber division that was kind of off doing its thing, working the ones and zeros. Meanwhile, you had individuals who really recognized the elements of a crime, whether it's in the criminal division or the counterterrorism division. And joining those forces together was very profitable for us, and we think that would be profitable for you, where you're actually combining IT and business lines together to address and mitigate the threat. And that's something that took us several years to get to, and I hope it doesn't take you as long. Obviously, protecting the crown jewels if you know where they are and who protects them. And then for us, active engagement with the private sector is a key. And we would ask that you would take us up on our offer to sort of visit, to provide briefings to the extent that that's helpful to you. And for us, long-term engagement is important. And if you don't know who your law enforcement contact is in your area, I would be happy to set you up with that individual or individuals. So feel free to ask questions. I'm sure Gunnar can reach out to me at any time. And if you have a question about who your contact is, we can certainly get that to you. And I would just like to say that for us, our vision moving forward, obviously, is the safety, security, and confidence that all of us need to have in a digitally connected world. And I think the mission now for us is that we're finally getting to a point where it's time for us to at least impose risk and consequences on cyber adversaries through the unique authorities that we have, world-class capabilities, and of course, the enduring partnerships and building upon that century of innovation that we've talked about starting in 1908. So if you have incidents that you want to report, obviously there are a couple of different ways for you to do that. You can call your FBI office directly. Of course, that's the easy way. You can also go online to either CyWatch, which is a 24/7 operation that we have in Virginia. You can go online. You can use the email address. You can call the phone number. You can do that with our cyber task forces and the InfraGard organizations that have been very, very helpful in spreading the message about FBI cyber over the last many years. And then, of course, you've got IC3, which has been very effective in sort of complaint and triaging of issues across the country over the last many years. So I would say that if none of those three things work for you, then please reach out to your local FBI office, reach out to me, and we'll put you in contact with somebody who can come out right away. But I would also ask that you, again, as we say, it's better to patch the roof while the sun is shining. So if you've not had an issue, please reach out to your FBI point of contact now, build that relationship, and don't wait until the bad news comes knocking. So I would leave it at that. I want to open it up for questions. Gunnar, I think you've got some other folks that are going to come on and talk, and I'm happy to talk now, or just kind of wait until my turn.
Eric, thanks so much. It was a great brief, and really appreciate the information. And we'll go ahead and hold questions until we hear from our next panelist, and then take a kind of a combined Q&A as the last portion of the briefing today. So appreciate that very much. Our next speaker is Chris Gabbard with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Chris is a cybersecurity advisor for Region 5, and Region 5 includes the states of Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, and Wisconsin, and he's based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. He supports the mission of strengthening the security and the resilience of the nation's critical infrastructure. Prior to joining CISA, Chris served as the Chief Information Security Officer at Ramsey County. And prior to being a CISO, he was an IT auditor and risk manager with PricewaterhouseCoopers, ING, and US Bank. He's a certified information security auditor. He has a bachelor's degree in accounting and management information system from the University of Northern Iowa. So Chris, I turn it over to you. Thanks so much for being here today.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. So yeah, kind of give you guys kind of a rundown. There's a lot of slides because we are DHS and we love to make a lot of PowerPoint slides. So as you can see, my name's Chris Gabbard. I'm a cybersecurity advisor, which we'll go into a little bit more in the presentation, out of Region 5. So I know that many people probably, I for one, before I actually joined and did some digging, I was not sure what CISA was and how it worked. I am a CISA, so I figured that was what I was. And instead, it's a newer agency, right? It's one of the youngest agencies in DHS. So it was signed into law as a part of the CISA Act of 2018. So we just celebrated our 1-year anniversary in November of the last year. So it was relatively new. So what we try to do is our vision is to secure and resilient infrastructure for the American people, right? So the mission is to lead the nation's efforts to understand and manage risk to our critical infrastructure. So as you can see, we need some cross-sector, cross-government coordination that goes across to stop adversary actions that the FBI just kind of talked about. Our mission set, I guess, or our motto is defend today and secure tomorrow. And so what we try to be is the nation's risk advisors. So what we try to do is we try to provide a unifying framework for all the national infrastructure protection that presents a common understanding of risk and enables the necessary collaboration among diverse stakeholders, which I'll go into next, right? So we try to go across the federal network, emergency communications, all of the things. So we try to gather the best of cybersecurity and infrastructure security knowledge and practices and share that knowledge to better enable risk management and puts into practice to protect the nation's essential resources. So the next slide is the critical infrastructure. I know that the critical infrastructure came out big, or essential workers came out big at the start of COVID. So the critical infrastructure, we always say, is it falls into 16 different sectors. So it goes in it. What I always say, it's the things that you take for granted when you get up in the morning. You have water, you have electricity, you have healthcare, you have certain different things, right? IT. So it's across these 16 different critical infrastructure sectors that we focus on to try and make sure that it's protected and will sustain any problems. So these are relative. They're across the federal government, state, local, and tribal, critical infrastructure owners, and everything. So one thing that I found interesting when I started was 80% of the critical infrastructure owned and operated by the private sector. So there's nothing that we do. We do not come in as regulators or anything like that. We come in as advisors, as in my title, right? We do not come in and say, thou shalt do. We try to work with them and build a partnership so that we can help them to become resilient. On top of this critical infrastructure, obviously there is, as I said, state, local, tribal, and territorial, as well as now one of the big pieces that we've been working on is elections. That was number one up until COVID hit, and then COVID kind of shifted the focus, and now with election, I believe it's 43 days around out, that has become a target of focus now. The next piece that we're going to focus on is, why are we here, right? Why are we talking about it? So cyberspace, I always say, we try to say, hey, it's a foundation to our world, right? We just went through it. Everybody's connected. Everybody's doing everything online. So the amount of information, data stored electronically is growing. Everything is interconnected, right? Government, third-party vendors. How do you communicate with your organization? How do you communicate with your friends and family, as well as other colleagues across your business lines? So of course, this makes the country dependent on makes cyber resiliency very important to critical infrastructure. So this is just kind of a here as a quick picture of that yes, it is cybersecurity is critical. What do we have, right? We have our buildings. How many of you have a Nest thermostat in your house, or something that you can just change the thermostat remotely? And it's become even more now with COVID. Everything has become more online, right? So that makes cybersecurity even more critical. Your transportation, you have the smart cars, you have your health, right? My son just hurt his finger the other day. They went in and they gave the X-ray back in an electronic version. So everything is becoming connected. So cybersecurity is becoming equal to physical security. Yet many of the times when we install a new system, we just kind of cobble it together, or we have a vendor come in to do it, and then the vendor walks out and then keeps it, walks out with all that knowledge of how they set it up. So the last question there, who minds the shop, right? I'll kind of breeze through these. This is kind of the same as what the FBI went through. This is just a quick thing of, here's today's risk landscape, right? So the first one there is insider threat risk, right? So, as they said, FBI said, hey, insider threat is becoming one of the bigger ones, especially now with COVID, right? So when people are losing money, they're going to have to start laying people off, furloughing people, suspending 401k and 403k matches, disgruntled workers, and that can go to, hey, how do I defend my crown jewels? So as you can see in the bottom right there, and this is kind of what the FBI was hitting on as well, is, hey, you could establish a program. How do you find out where those crown jewels are? You need to protect those assets. You need to recognize and report. You need to really put a focus on those, and then of course assess and respond. Now, the FBI hit on this as well, advanced persistent threat, right? So there's Russia, we always call these the big four. There's Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. We kind of ran down the China front. The FBI hit that. Yes, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to gain access to your networks and try to take away your proprietary data. Russia, they have the most comprehensive cyber espionage program. What they're trying to do is they're trying to influence and attack the United States, right? So they're trying to. This is where you hear election influence and all the other good stuff coming out of elections. And we hit China and then Iran. Iran, they try to do cyber espionage too, and they're also trying to come up with some influence ads. China and their influence ads is trying to say, they're really targeting the COVID response and how great we have to rely on China and how great China is and how well they are responding to the COVID crisis. And then North Korea, and they're really targeting financial institutions. So what they're trying to do is get that money. They're trying to take the money and fund their country and their military. This slide here, this is one of the scariest slides I can probably have. So along the bottom there, you have, hey, here's your state actors with greater capabilities. So this is your China's and Russia's. And then you have state actors with lesser capabilities, which is kind of your Iran's and North Korea's. And then you have cyber criminals, criminal hackers, and terrorists. So as you go across these lines, the further they stick out, that's the easier, that's the level of sophistication that it takes to be able to do this. So website defacement, DDoS, PII. But once you get to the top, right, where you start to get to theft of intellectual property, disruption of critical infrastructure, damage to critical infrastructure, if those lines start to extend out where cyber criminals are able to do that, then that's where, hey, when I wake up in the morning, I can't have my water for my cup of coffee. That's going to start to really affect the nation. So that's why they're kind of in our wheelhouse here at DHS. So the next slide, and this is where I try to bring it back down to, here's kind of brass tacks. It's still the same threats. It's not that these companies have come up with anything new or anything great on what's going on here. It's still ransomware. Lockbit has been coming out. They're starting to change their tactics though with this Lockbit ransomware, where they're going to try and extract your data before they encrypt it. So people are seeing that, hey, this data is a bit, I could double hit them because here's your ransomware and I have your data, and now I can try and sell that. Now, phishing campaigns, of course, business email compromise, that's been around for decades. Microsoft, cited that there's new cyber attacks targeting the U.S. elections. So a lot of this is your password spraying, patching, lack of software patching and updates. The zero logon bug that CISA came out and gave an emergency directive on for Microsoft. They said, hey, everything needs to be patched by Monday. So when it comes to Patch Tuesday, everything needs to be done. Misconfiguration of technology. In January, Microsoft leaked 250 million records due to a misconfigured technology. All of these things, increase in IoT, right? That's where we say, hey, I got a new TV, or I want to connect my things to my Wi-Fi. How do you do that? How do you do that securely? Password management, relatively easy. Long passwords are better than complex passwords. When I was a CISO, we ran through and we cracked over 60% of the passwords when it was 8 characters and complex. We increased that to 12, and we cracked less than 40%. So, once you make them longer, even by 4 characters, it makes a big difference. So all of these threats increase your likelihood of compromise. So what can you do, right? All you need to do is really kind of follow your best practices, right? So leadership must own the issues. Leadership must see these as an issue and be able to push it forward. Good cyber hygiene. How do you go about protecting those crown jewels? What's your basic blocking and tackling? Like I said, there's not new cyber threats. They're still the same cyber threats. They just haven't, they're just changing them just a little bit. But a lot of your blocking and tackling does it well, right? What I had heard is do the simple things well. So if you patch, hey, rather than worrying about how many exploits are out there and how McAfee can stop all those exploits, well, you can knock down thousands of exploits in one patch, right? So if you just do your simple things well, just do patching well, you're going to knock down 1,000 exploits rather than trying to mitigate 1,000 different exploits. Risk management there in the bottom left. How much risk can you accept? Because you don't want to overspend, because then that's taking money away from R&D or anything else that you're doing, but you want to spend enough to be able to stop these threats. So, but that's all, that's your balance between security and your mission and privacy. On the top right there is be prepared, assess, see where you're at, what can you do, audits, being a former auditor, everyone was afraid of audits. But when I sat on the other side, being audited, hey, it really helps you to figure out, where should I focus? What should I do next? And then obviously exercise, right? Tabletops are a big thing. If you can do a tabletop, then make sure, that helps to find out where's another gap. Defend and continue to operate, right? So, do what you can to defend this. Hey, build that wall, but you can't just focus on the wall. You got to worry about, what if that drone flies over the top? And then leverage relationships. We're all in this together, right? Whether you're in private sector, public sector, everybody's kind of fighting the same fight, fighting the same enemy. So, while this is all doom and gloom, everything, is bad, and you're never gonna be able to win the fight. Well, don't worry, I'm from the federal government and I'm here to help. So what we're trying to do, and that's where I'll kind of go through here with, here's the CISA cybersecurity services. So just to kind of give you a little bit of background on what's a cybersecurity advisor and what's a cybersecurity advisor do. So what we're trying to do is we have one mission: to lead the collaborative national effort to strengthen the security and resiliency of America's critical infrastructure. So how do we do that? We do assessments, right? We do things like this, where we promote. We try to encourage best practices and risk mitigation strategies. If you have a question, maybe we can help you with it, answering one of those questions. We develop capacity and support cyber communities of ISTRs and working groups, right? So what do we try to do? We educate and inform and raise awareness. So, a lot of times I always found that when I was a CISO, that if a vendor came in, that vendor or, auditor or whoever came in, people seem to listen to them more. That even if I'd been saying the same thing for a year, if the vendor or somebody came in and said it kind of helped reinforce that message, and they went, oh, it's not just him, asking for money or saying that everything's doom and gloom. And then, what we try to do is collect stakeholder requirements. How can we do this? How can we bring this all together and do incident support and lessons learned? And so this is just a map of CISA deployed personnel. As you heard earlier, we are in Region 5, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio. So there's about 24 of us currently spread across the US. In Region 5, there's myself in Minnesota. There's another CSA in Chicago and another CSA in Lansing, Michigan. So we kind of are spread across the region here, and then across the nation. So here's some samplings of our cybersecurity offerings, right? So we do preparedness assistance. As a CSA, we also have PSAs, which are protected security advisors. So I'll kind of run through these. As a CSA, we do advisory services. We do these assessments. I'll get into those in just a minute. We have working group collaboration. We bring forward, hey, what's the best practices? What's NIST say, or what's the best practice for what are we seeing across the water sector or the electric sector? And we have incident assistance. The PSAs, they're more on the physical side. So those guys can do physical assessments. They do incident liaisons. So here in Minnesota, I'm sure you heard the social unrest during the George Floyd upheaval. So those guys were really embedded in there to help those guys. And they support special security events. So Cleveland, I know, has the presidential debate coming up next week. So we've been involved in that. And then through Wisconsin, they had the DNC. And then after, when things go bad, what do? We have some incident response assistance, right? So we can do remote or on-site. We have malware analysis. We have a hunt and incident response team that'll come in when you're and try to find the culprit. And then we have some incident coordination. So these of course are subject to all national priorities. So just to kind of give you a rundown of here's our cybersecurity assessments. So when I say regional resources, that's myself and the other 2 CSAs in the region. So when I say that, you're competing against the rest of the region, you're not competing against the rest of the nation. Then when I go under here, under national resources, that's where you kind of compete against the rest of the nation and those national resources, right? So you might be able, I always say it's kind of like the meat market assessments, where you take a number and you wait for your number to be called. So the top one's the cyber resiliency review. That kind of gives you a look to see where your maturity is in your cybersecurity program. External dependencies management kind of tells you where are you at with your external dependencies. Do you know where they're coming in? Do you know how they're going? Where are they moving? The CIS is more of a it gives your cybersecurity, but it also gives you a moving target. So it says, hey, if I come in here and I invest in X, how will that improve my cybersecurity posture? And then the cybersecurity evaluations tool, that can be done. That's done by you. You can download it right off of CISA.gov. Now the national resources, those are a little bit tougher to get into, right? Tabletop exercises, phishing campaigns, as they said, hey, you know, they'll come in and they'll do the phishing campaign for you. Vulnerability scanning, that will, and slash cyber hygiene, that is a service that's relatively easy to sign up for if you're interested in it. That basically scans your public facing IPs, and it basically does a Nessus scan against your public facing IPs to make sure that, you know, everything's patched up. There's nothing exposed out there. It was great for me because it was one less thing that I had to scan for, or I used it as a second set of eyes against, hey, I already have an outside firm doing this. Are they catching everything? Web application scanning, as we move down here, they get much more technical and much more deep, right? So a validated architecture diagram, a red team assessment, risk and vulnerability assessment, that's basically your risk and vulnerability assessment is your full-fledged campaign to try and get in. On top of that, you know, periodic assessments are very important. You know, you can have an assessment, but that's a point in time. So if you had one today, it's as good as September 24th. If you implement something new tomorrow, that assessment, you know, while you closed one of those holes, that assessment does not, it's no longer up to date. So we can't stress it enough. You can sign up for these assessments as many times as you want, and you know, to do them periodically is a great piece. And lastly, I just want to go through, hey, we do have incident reporting. As I said, we had the malware analysis, and if you have an incident, here's the information on how to contact. There's also on CISA.gov, there's a report a cyber incident right at the top of the page. So you know, this helps to, again, build that risk register. So hey, if there's 14 water companies that are reporting something, maybe, you know, we'll send out an alert to all the water companies across the nation to be able to say, hey, look out for this. Works great for SLTT too, because everybody never has enough staff, right? So you might as well report it in, and then maybe you'll get some of the stuff out of it. Now, malware submission, right? Please don't send malware to the federal government. So as you can see, there must be provided a password protected zip file. So please zip it up, or you can do it right there on the web submission. It's just my contact information. And then Kelly is out of Michigan. She helps to cover Ohio as well. So we across the three of us, we really help to cover all of it, you know, all of Region 5. But Kelly's primary focus is on Ohio and Michigan. So with that, I will take a drink and be open for any questions.
Chris, thank you so much. That was fantastic. Some really exceptional information from both the FBI and CISA. And just a couple of points while we let Chris get a sip of water and get his notes in order, ready for the Q&A. How important it is to not only understand the threats, but be proactive on things like patching, on assessments, on TTXs. These are proactive measures that can really help you get ahead of the curve. And I think we both our speakers really talked to that. Another point that I think both the speakers talked about is how important it is to engage with the United States government really ahead of time, because you don't want to be in that reactive state and then have to figure out who your FBI rep is, who your CISA rep is, or your Secret Service rep, and do that. We had a question from the audience about who should I reach out to. I think the attendee was from the Chicago area. Certainly reach out to the FBI field office in Chicago and engage with them. And you can just call them directly or email them and say, hey, I'd like to speak to somebody from the the cyber squad. And certainly the contact information for all 56 field offices, all the CISA representatives are on their respective websites, and we'll make sure that gets out to everybody. But start that conversation early, and you may not know when you need to have that conversation. I know here at MCPc, when the pandemic started here in March, I engaged with our protective security advisor here from CISA, here the local rep, Mike McMasters. I think Mike and I spoke pretty much every week for several weeks, between speaking with him and then listening on the CISA weekly or daily calls for a while. Relating to the pandemic, and then the Ohio Emergency Medical Management Services here in the state. But having those ahead of time was critical for some of our activities here to keep our business functioning. So all that information is out there. Certainly engage with your local FBI office, your Secret Service office, and your CISA representative. Really critical. So the first question, and I know Dom will be hopping on here too with some questions. First question to both Eric and Chris, and Chris made reference to this. We're obviously in an election year. We've got the debate here in Cleveland next Tuesday, and I'm just curious. I'm sure some of our audiences as well. What is your perspective on what your agencies and what the government as a whole is doing to protect our election infrastructure and the integrity of the election process? So, Eric, I'll kick that over to you, and then and have Chris follow up.
Thanks, Gunnar. Yeah, obviously great question, a huge issue for us. And the great part about that is that it is a truly interagency issue. So we're working, with the U.S. Secret Service, with our other interagency law enforcement partners and intelligence agencies, and we've been doing this really since about 2016. So, and I know DHS has as well, working to address kind of, talking to our local election officials throughout the state as part of specific election interference task forces. And we've been working with these partners, right after we saw the issues coming out of the 2016 election. We've recently pulled in our U.S. postal inspectors because of the expected increase in mail-in balloting. So, from our perspective, we've addressed it through, a combination of experts. So we've got our foreign counterintelligence folks, our cyber, our public corruption squads, to ensure we're looking at it from all those perspectives. And of course, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and we have a run through a number of iterations of potential scenarios to sort of ensure we've got the proper preparation for any potential issues that come up, whether it's voter fraud or whether it's, malign foreign influence from a state actor overseas. That, in 2016, you might not be wrong if you thought that a country weighed in on behalf of a specific candidate. This year, I think it's more about really dividing us as a nation and less about supporting a specific candidate. So, we always tell folks is that when you go online to look at political discourse, whether it's on Facebook or whatever your social media platform of choice is, and you see two people taking two different sides of an issue, and they're named Bobby and Susie, in all likelihood, it could be Ivan and Svetlana that are having that conversation, but really wanting to sow discord within the American public and make them think that, we don't have an institution or election institution that can be trusted. So we're looking at that. We're working with our social media companies to address those issues. But, just be careful what you're reading online, and make sure you're getting all your news and information from multiple sources. That's all I would cover right now.
Chris, anything to add on the election security issue?
Yeah, I totally agree with Eric, and it's just like anything else you read online, right? You got to take everything with a strain of salt, with a grain of salt. But from CISA, elections, like I said before, was our number one priority. Then we had to kind of shift to COVID, and now, I mean, they're both. It's 1A and 1B, right? So what we've been doing is we've been working with all local government and state government to be able to, how do we make sure that that there is an influence, right? And how do we make sure that everything's protected? There's lots of documentaries and things that talk about how unsecure it is. But again, take a look at them. They might say, hey, the voting machine can get hacked. Well, there might be 6 other things that might be a compensating control ahead of that one machine that might get hacked. So you got to take everything with a little grain of salt.
Great, thanks for that. So I'm going to pass over to Dom, because I'm sure he's got a lot of questions from his clients, from his perspective, and see what's on his mind.
Sure. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having us, and thanks for your time today. Switching over to ransomware a little bit, as we counsel thousands of clients through ransomware events. Interested in your thoughts as to the time in which to bring you all in. B, what you're looking for specifically in the way of data requests and evidence when our clients are faced with ransomware. And then any thoughts, we always get the question, obviously, we would like to rebuild or restore from backups, but oftentimes we do have to negotiate with the threat actors. Our clients are always asking us, what would law enforcement say? Can we do this? And so certainly any thoughts you can give us on that third point there, please.
This is Eric. I'll take a swipe at it. For us, I know there's a lot of discussion about whether or not are we getting ahead of the issue, or are we falling behind? And I would say that the first thing we would suggest is just having good cyber hygiene, which kind of goes without saying. I know it's not necessarily sexy or flashy, but that is effective. And I think everybody needs to assume they're going to be hit with ransomware and sort of prepare for that. And to prepare for that, our suggestion, and I'm sure CISA would say the same thing, it's, sort of segregating that network to sort of minimize the damage, to, making sure you're compartmentalized in a way and you've ensured that your backups are routine, that they're consistent, and that those backups are stored on someplace that are, that's separate. And then for us, sort of red team it a little bit, challenge your IT folks, your contractor, as to what the response would be in the event of a ransomware attack. Kind of walk through that, tabletop it, as Chris was talking about it. And then, we've seen, and maybe Chris has seen it too, we've seen third-party sort of IT folks kind of walk away and the company's sort of left without any expertise to resolve the issue. And so I would say internally, even without a third party, just make sure you're restoring your backups. And investigatively, that's one of the things that we talk about, making sure that you're having that relationship early, so we can have, and I wouldn't be able to speak to any specific issue right now, but I would just say have that relationship early, and then our folks and other organizations like CISA could certainly help you address that individual threat to determine whether or not to move forward with some sort of agreement. But that's where I would throw it. I'd offer it to Chris for follow-up.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, I mean, our focus is get us in before it happens, right? So that's where our assessments try to help, is to, hey, can we find that hole in the dike and plug it before it actually gets hit, right? And I always go back to hey, do the simple things well, right? If you do the patching, ransomware 90% of the time is focused on trying to hit something that has an unpatched vulnerability in it. Phishing campaigns, anything you can do to try and raise that cybersecurity awareness with your employees is going to knock down that ransomware. And then I totally agree with Eric of, hey, if you segregate your network and hide your backups and do everything you can just in case, and test those backups. I saw it before where don't worry, we have everything backed up. And then as soon as you have to restore, well, maybe that backup was corrupted for, you know, a month or 6 months or a year, whatever. Then you're really going to get stuck. You know, and I mean, the federal government stance is don't pay the ransomware, because if you pay the ransom, then that just emboldens them to try to hit somebody else with it. So, you know, and that's the services that we're trying to do, is how can we make you more resilient so that if you get hit, you can recover from it. And Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, the FBI is how can we find who did this and how do we prosecute them to the full extent of the law.
You've spoken like a true law enforcement officer, Chris. We always want to put somebody in jail here. Yeah.
Great. Yep. Thank you. And just to follow up, so in case they don't bring you in beforehand, and unfortunately they are hit with ransomware, and maybe this is more to Eric, but what are the types of things you're looking for to help get to that? Who is it? And, you know, can you bring them to justice and prosecute them? What are things that you're looking for clients who have suffered ransomware events to produce to you in the way of evidence, either from their forensic investigation or their internal findings, to help your investigation?
Yeah, I would just say in terms of, you know, we can get to the root of the issue fairly quickly, just in terms of how it was done, what the delivery was like, what kind of encryption was used, whether or not there's a monetization aspect, which there usually is, and what the impact is. And using those 3 things or 4 things together, we can kind of identify based on signatures, you know, who's doing it and then how we can best mitigate it. So, and that's why I go back again to make sure we have those connections early, because we can, based on sort of the lessons learned and the sort of the large compendium of data that we've got over the years, that we can identify who those actors are and get to the heart of it pretty quickly.
Great, thanks. Gunnar, I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Eric and Chris. And kind of following that train of thought, I'm curious. I know a lot of companies are hesitant to call the government, call law enforcement, you know, because of the fear that the government is going to either do something publicly with their information, release that. So could you talk about the you know, what that process looks like and the discretion you take in kind of protecting, you know, the private sector potential data breach?
So from a CISA perspective, if you're considered critical infrastructure, any of the assessments that we do are covered under PCII, which is Protected Critical Infrastructure Information. So that's free from any FOIA request. So if you know, if the Cleveland, I forget what the name of the paper is there, you know, if they were to call at me or anybody and say, hey, has the city of Cleveland done anything from a cyber resiliency with DHS? We would say, I'm sorry, that's covered under Protected Critical Infrastructure Information. So, you know, the issues that we might find during one of those cyber resiliency reviews or any of the other reviews should be we have all kinds of paperwork, of course, for you to sign that that will protect that information. It's between you and the federal government.
Yeah, I would just I would caveat. I would say the same thing. For us, we're not a regulatory agency, and so when we go in to, you know, look at a situation, we're not reporting, you know, what a company did or did not do to protect data. I mean, that's not part of our, you know, we're looking at the actor. We're trying to get to the heart of who did it and how can we best, you know, get to the actor and prosecute them for this theft. We're looking at the company as a victim and not as somebody who maybe didn't have the right patches installed. You know, that being said, we want to impress upon everybody the importance it is to take the right steps early on to mitigate those issues early up, but we don't come into a company and then look to expose them to affect their bottom line. That's the furthest thing from our desires. We're trying to get to the heart of the issue, which is find the enemy, prosecute them, and prevent it from happening again.
Fantastic. Well, I know we're getting close on time here, and so I think the last potential last question here to Chris and to Eric. if you could have the private sector do one or two things, give them one or two bits of advice, the most critical things for them to do, what would that be? So Chris, I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, my answer is I would do the assessments, right? So that will help to. Nobody likes to see it because nobody likes to see the the dirty underbelly of things that you're not doing right, because people like to see that they're doing stuff well, right? I know that when I sat in the CISA seat, I didn't like audit, but it can also be helpful that if you're trying to build a cybersecurity program or do or sell cybersecurity and the importance of cybersecurity, to use those assessments to point out that, hey, look, there are flaws and we need to fix these flaws. And it helps to build your cybersecurity program. And that's the key, right? Is if you can come up with a cybersecurity program, you'll knock a lot more down, right? You'll be able to do that basic blocking and tackling. Otherwise, hey, you talk to any vendor, the vendor is going to say, I have the best antivirus software out there, or endpoint protection, or whatever. Again, until you know that your antivirus software is going to stay up to date, it's going to give you the right reports, et cetera, it's not really that good for you. So a good cybersecurity program is a good place to start. And just pick a pick a governance channel, whether it be COVID or CIS top 20 or the NIST framework. The NIST framework is great, but you also got to balance that approach, right? It's got to be that acceptance of risk.
For us, it's when we're asked a question like this, I'm kind of reminded of when somebody asked Conrad Hilton, who was the founder of the Hilton hotel empire. He said, "What would you like every guest to know?" And he said, "The shower curtain goes inside the tub." And so I think that's for us. I would say the three things that we would, or the two or three things. One, if you're a small or medium office, know that you're a target, because they expect larger corporations to have and to spend a lot of money and resources protecting their networks. So if you're a smaller company and perhaps you're a third-party vendor, those are the folks and those are the places that these guys are trying to target. So one, make sure you take the cyber threat seriously if you're a small or medium business. Two, obviously be prepared for the cyber attack that's coming. Have a plan, have an incident response plan, and exercise it. And then, of course, as part of that, make sure you have a good law enforcement partner contact that you can use to reach out to, hopefully before the incident, but certainly after the incident. And then, kind of what I said at the beginning of this presentation, which is, treat cybersecurity as a business problem and not as an IT problem. This is our problem collectively. And I think it's important that too many companies look at cyber as a responsibility as they're for IT department only and don't take any ownership. And as Chris said, this is a leadership issue. So all these IT systems were used to develop and support the business operations. And if you're not taking it seriously, you don't have any business operations to protect. So that would be the three things that I would say. But certainly have that incident response plan and have that law enforcement contact that you can use, hopefully before, but certainly after an issue. That's all I got.
Wow, thank you very much for that, Eric and Chris. On behalf of McDonald, Hopkins, and MCPc, I can't thank you enough for spending so much of your time here with us today. I know you're both incredibly busy, and we really, really appreciate it. And there's been a couple of questions from the audience about the session being recorded. Will be available. It will be available. There'll be more information sent out on that next week, so that'll be something that you can review down the road. And so we will continue to follow and report on the latest developments concerning data privacy and cybersecurity. Hopefully this will lead to some additional discussions to each of you as a thought leader, as a decision maker in your organization. And we hope you'll join us on October 8th for our next session in our Cyber Masterclass series, which is Understanding Legal and Cyber Risk Imperatives. If you have any questions that did not get addressed today, please email events@mcdonaldhopkins.com so we can follow up with you. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a great day. Be safe. Take care.